In the years since Biggie's murder, the investigation has made little headway. The Los Angeles Police Department has failed to make any arrests or publicly identify a suspect.
I am so angry sometimes, it scares me. You know why? Because there are people right now that I'm supposed to trust, and I cannot trust them because I don't know who killed my son.
That woman deserves a professional investigation, and it wasn't done.
Now the detective who spent 2 years investigating the case is making some alarming accusations.
I believe there was a conspiracy to kill Biggie Smalls, and the key to solving that case were police officers on our force that I believe that had connections to death row.
Russell Poole says the Los Angeles Police Department refused to allow him to pursue what he believed were pivotal leads in the murder case.
Nothing was done about it. Even when I forced them to look at the evidence, I shoved it in their face.
When he took over the Biggie Smalls case in April of 1997, Detective Russell Poole was a 16-year veteran of the LAPD. The son of an LA County Sheriff's detective, Poole had established an impeccable reputation on the force, earning a prestigious assignment to the Robbery Homicide Division's Major Crimes Unit.
Russell Poole, having talked to people who worked with him, is one of the best homicide investigators that the LAPD had. I talked to district attorneys who said that they'd worked with every homicide investigator on the LAPD, and he was the best.
Detective Poole says his first line of investigation in the notorious B.I.G. case was the well-publicized rivalry between Bad Boy and Death Row and their feuding CEOs.
I had put together a timeline of all the confrontations between Bad Boy Records and Death Row Records. We had believed that there was a connection, possible retaliation for the Tupac Shakur killing.
As Poole probed Death Row, he says he discovered a troubling link between police officers and Suge Knight's label.
There was plenty of evidence to suggest that certain LAPD officers had connections with Death Row Records. Some were working security, some were confidants of Suge Knight.
Poole believes one of those officers was David Mack. He says Mack was a flamboyant figure on the force who wore the same blood-red suits as Suge Knight. An informant at Death Row reportedly described Mack as a regular at Knight's private parties.
He had a bright red suit, identical to one worn by Suge Knight. He was the same age as Suge Knight. He grew up in Compton with Suge Knight.
Suge Knight was not available for an interview due to his incarceration on unrelated charges. But through his attorney, he denies any connection to David Mack.
Mr. Knight has no knowledge of Mr. Mack either personally, socially, business-wise, nothing.
David Mack was a dirty cop. In November of 1997, 9 months after Biggie's murder, surveillance footage caught Mack in the act of robbing a Los Angeles bank of $722,000. He was convicted and sentenced to 14 years in prison. And when federal agents searched Mack's home, Poole believed they uncovered leads in the Biggie Smalls case.
When they went to David Mack's house, in his garage was a black SS Impala.
A black Chevy Impala was identified as the car driven by the shooter.
Also on the walls were an apparent shrine for Tupac Shakur, dressed in red and flashing signs and stuff like that on the walls of his garage.
He had a whole storehouse of ammunition at his house, 9mm ammo, which was used in the killing.
When Poole examined David Mack's attendance records, he came across yet another coincidence.
He took 3 family illness days just prior to the Biggie Smalls killing.
And finally, Poole says, when he placed David Mack's photo in a lineup, one witness identified Mack as being present at the museum the night of the murder.
One of the witnesses in Biggie's entourage identified David Mack near the door of the Peterson Museum, and he was positive when he made the identification.
While Poole was suspicious of Mack, he knew he did not resemble the sketch of the suspect, that neatly dressed African-American in a bow tie. But the detective contends someone close to Mack did.
The composite resembles David Mack's best friend and godfather of his kids, Amir Muhammad.
While Muhammad steadfastly denies any involvement in the murder, Poole noted that a jailhouse informant told police that Biggie was murdered by a contract killer who went by the name Amir or Ashmir.
When you add up all those connections, you've got yourself a lot to work with. However, we were unable to proceed with those clues.
If you're a detective and you've got all these clues in front of you, I mean, it says, hey, we got to find this guy and we've got to pursue this. And that's what Detective Russell Poole wanted to do, but he wasn't allowed to do.
Poole says he communicated his evidence to his superiors all the way up to Chief of Police Bernard Parks, but he claims he was told to drop any investigation into Amir Muhammad or David Mack.
I documented all the clues that would suggest that David Mack was possibly involved, and I was told that no, we're not going that route. David Mack's gone down for the bank robbery. We don't need to go into any more controversy.
Poole says he was not allowed to inspect Mack's black Chevy Impala or perform a search of his home or even interview Amir Muhammad.
I saw this individual know that he saw me.
Now, Behind the Music has tracked down a witness who claims he saw Amir Muhammad outside the Peterson Museum the night of the murder.
Yeah, it's the same guy. Same guy that walked up on me. I don't know if he did the shooting, but this is the guy who walked up on me that night.
The witness, who asked us to conceal his identity, was working security that night. He says he is certain he saw Amir Muhammad standing near the museum exit, wearing a blue suit and bow tie, shortly before the shooting occurred.
He just looked me in my eye, and I looked him dead in his eye. And he walked away, going in the direction where the Notorious Big was shot later.
The LAPD has publicly stated that Amir Muhammad is not a suspect, and Muhammad's attorney says his client has never even been questioned by police.
Evidently, there are information that's not being followed. There are leads that's not being followed. I mean, if you get a lead, it doesn't matter how minuscule it is. This is a murder. You should follow it up.
There was a failure to follow up completely on these clues, and I believe it was orchestrated that way.
Ultimately, Russell Poole felt his investigation had been so sabotaged that he had no choice but to quit the force in October of 1999.
I just could no longer be associated with the Los Angeles Police Department based on my involvement in these investigations and their failure to follow up on them.
In September 2000, he filed a lawsuit against the LAPD, claiming Chief Parks violated his First Amendment right to speak out about evidence that suggested police officers were involved in criminal activity.
I want the truth to be exposed.
David Mack denies any involvement in the Biggie Smalls murder, as does Death Row CEO Suge Knight.
Russell Poole has nothing but rumors, street talk, and the statements of incarcerated felons who are trying to buy their way out of either prison time or jail time or get out of cases that they have pending against them. He has no evidence whatsoever to tie Mr. Knight to the killing of Biggie Smalls.
The Los Angeles Police Department and Chief Bernard Parks refused Behind the Music's request for an interview, stating only that Russell Poole's allegations are totally false and that any further comments might jeopardize the integrity of the investigation. But Mrs. Wallace is disgusted by the possibility of what Russell Poole is alleging, and she is determined to find justice for her murdered son.
I will never give up. I will be assertive. I will haunt the police officers. I will call them every time I feel like it until they found out who killed my son.